Hi, come on in. Someone want to grab the door behind them when they're done? Well, wait, there's a few more people. There's some seats up here. There's one in the second row. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Melody Lay. I am manager for a pen test team with the Government of Ontario. I'm really just here to introduce the speakers. Our next speaker here is Nigel Phair. I'm told he's an all-around great guy, so I hope you make him feel welcome and ask him lots of questions at the end. Nigel's talk is Reporting to the Board, Improving Knowledge, Increasing Understanding. So looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm sure they told me I was going to be in the big room. But anyway, I can tell you from the last session, which had more people in here, the air conditioning's a little bit how you're going. So let's hope they've decided to turn it on. But look, I think what we're going to talk about, or what I'm going to talk about, and there's going to be time for a stack of questions at the end, is probably the most important, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but probably the most important part of the role in InfoSec. It's great that, I think this is about my 12th AusCERT conference and I think the 5th one I've spoken at. It's great there's a ton of InfoSec people here and welcome to you all. But what I'm going to talk about is really the pointy end of what it means. And again, maybe I'm a little bit biased. So, speaking of coming to AusCERT, exactly 10 years ago I launched at AusCERT, back when I was at Royal Pines, if people remember the Royal Pines days. I just remember the golf at Royal Pines. But nothing like vendor-paid golf, beer carts, food. But I put out a book called Cybercrime Reality of the Threat, written in 2006, launched in 2007. Interesting book. Looking back at it now is even more interesting. Doesn't even have a chapter in it about social media, for example, because really was social media a big deal? Not really 10 years ago. And that's when I started thinking about what does it mean to be a company director in looking after an organisation. And a lot has changed since that time. So for those of you that might work for a publicly listed company or maybe a privately listed company, not-for-profit, whatever, a lot of you probably have got interaction in some way, shape or form with some sort of governance overarching board, whatever they might be called. And the role of a company director is a very distinct role. The Corporations Act 2001 specifically says the roles and responsibilities of a company director. Yet, of course, we see in the media reasonably regularly when they get in trouble for whether it's insider trading, not using their duties properly, whatever it might be. And of course, ASIC as the, let's call it in media speak, the watchdog, the corporate regulator, every now and then puts a few of them through court. So when we look at it, that hierarching, that view, directors are focused on really on three things, and it's the strategy of the organisation. What does it really mean? Where are we going in the next 3 to 5 years? And of course, this is sector specific about what they might address with that. Of course, risk, and we're going to talk a lot about risk very shortly. And most importantly, wrapping that all up is the governance. What is the governance framework around that organisation? Now, your experienced company director, and I can tell you the statistics in Australia, the average company director, particularly in the ASX side of the house, so that's a little bit skewed. Your typical company director is male, white, and 63 years old. Now, we can talk all about that demographic. Actually, we should, because it's good fun. One could say they don't really get technology. And that's been borne out by a whole lot of other studies and statistics and everything like that. So they're the people that are charged with particularly the governance. They're governance professionals. They're not management. And there's a big delineation between directors up here at governance and managers down here as the doing. And the terminology is really important because you get a lot of infiltration between those two. You get managers that think they're a little bit too special and that they should be at a higher level, and you get a ton of company directors that just want to get their fingers in the pie. Particularly when you get to medium-sized organisations, particularly in the not-for-profit sphere. where they go, oh, I'm really passionate about this cause, I want to get involved, and it's not their role. And of course, I was only thinking this as I was walking in, and we got the ASA people outside, and I'll throw it out there, I'm an ASA member, so I'm far from bagging them out, but for those that are here that are ASA members, when you've been seeing all those email communications over the last 6 months, where they've now become a management board, there is no such thing. You're either management or you're the board. You can't be both. The Corporations Act doesn't allow you to be both, but we'll leave that hanging out there. So the company, when you look at company directors, a lot of the boards now are starting to get presentations, particularly from your big four organisations, your big four consulting, PwCs, Deloitte et al. And they're coming in and telling them, you know, your organisation is facing a digital tsunami. It's all going to go to custard. It is just terrible. You know, they do white papers on this. They'll come in for free because the cynic in me says, well, they're trying to sell a consulting service out the back end. But there is starting to be a lot more of that discussion in the boardroom about what it is and why it is. And so coming out of that, they want to know answers. And so for you that work in organisations that are big enough to not just have a decent sized professional board, many of you will also be having a risk and audit committee. My advice is they're your best friends. And a lot of people, it's like consultants not being sure of how to interact with a CFO in an organisation. I think they're their best friend. I think for you as professionals out there, your risk and audit committee are your best friend. They get risk. Just because you put the word cyber in the front of it really confuses them, but they still aren't, it's all risk. At the end of the day, they're going to want a matrix, they're going to want spreadsheets, they're going to want stuff they can make decisions on. And so they're the people that you really need to be saddling up to and going, how can I make your job as a risk and audit committee who reports through to the board, how can I make your job easier and in turn make my job a whole lot easier? So some things to think about when you're having that chat. So of course, everyone wants more budget. It goes without saying. We all want more money to do stuff, whether it's consulting services, whether it's widgets, boxes, whatever it might be. So something for the journey I think you should take your organisation through. Again, we're talking governance. Remember those three words: strategy, risk and governance. That's what they're talking about, not the doing. You don't want to be talking about the doing. Too many people, again, when they're doing their presentations, get too technical and too tactical. That's a management job, not a board job. So if you're going to go to the board and you're going to say, we're in this industry, I think we're facing this threat profile, and therefore we need to do some certain things. The first thing you need to do is get from that company, set of company directors, is what is the organisational strategy for that next 3 years? Because you can't craft a cybersecurity or an information security, as I prefer to use, strategy unless you know where the organisation is going. And of course, it's trite to say, we hear all those things about, you know, it's not an IT problem if you get hacked, it's a business problem, and that's all true. In fact, it's very true. So therefore, because it's a business problem, unless you're privy, and of course you're just the IT guy or girl, and you're probably not privy, unless you're privy to where the organisation sees itself, it might see itself entering new markets. They might be offshore markets. You might be getting into another vertical, an adjacent business. They might be undertaking a merger and acquisition on either side of the fence. Unless you are privy at some level to those discussions, you really can't work out how you're going to spend your time and money and that of your InfoSec team, even if it's just by yourself. Till you know that, you really can't sort of say, and by the way, this is how we're going to manage the risk of being online and technology and everything. So that's the first thing, is to really think about where's the organisation headed and how I'm going to help you guys get there, because you pay me the big bucks. Well, some of you get the big bucks. I work at a university, I can tell you, I don't get big bucks. That's another story for another day. The next thing to think about when you're talking to the directors and you're giving them the briefing and you're saying, these are the things that we're doing and everything's great, you're keeping it very high level, very governance focused, is to get them to, and they're all going to say, this is great, we want to make sure we're protected. And you're going to go, well, you know, protection's a funny word. Let's talk about resilience. You know, let's talk about a few other things, because I can't guarantee we're going to be protected, etc. Unless, of course, you start putting lots of zeros in front of the decimal points. And they're going to go, that's great, except you're not getting the budget. We've all been there. So The Risk and Audit Committee is, again, they're your friends. You want to get them to sort of sign off on what you're doing. They've got to agree. That very far right column of the spreadsheet, the very far right one that says, what are you doing about this? You know, it might be a pen test, or it might be an insurance policy, or it might be a whatever. For them to agree to that, you've got to get them to agree to what sort of standard of an organisation do we want to be when we come to information security. So we might talk about being the gold standard in our sector. And of course, they'll agree to that. They'll say, yeah, we want to be the gold standard. We want to be known for information security. We're going to have technical. We're going to have policy. We're going to have process. We're going to have people involved. This is going to be great. And you go, I'll get back to you. And then when you get back to them saying, this is what it involves being the gold standard. We're going to need all this money. We're going to need all these people. We're going to do all this great work. It's going to be awesome. And they'll have a look at that. And I can tell you from experience, they'll start going, tell me what it's like to be the silver standard. Maybe the bronze. I like bronze. Bronze is good because bronze is cheap. And until you take them down that road of what it means to be bronze, and I've got nothing against organisations that are the bronze standard in information security, all I ask is that if you're going to be the bronze standard, say it and say, we acknowledge we're only the bronze standard, but I've signed off on this as the Risk and Audit Committee. It might mean that if the network goes down, we don't get it back up for 3 days, whereas the gold standard might be 3 hours or 3 minutes. And that's the journey. That's why they're your best friend, because once you take, again, the Risk and Audit Committee are great because they spend a lot more time on it. The board gets board packs 2 inches thick. They might meet for 6 hours in a day, and all they're thinking about is the dinner that night with the quality red wines. They're thinking about the golf day. They've got a ton of work they've got to wade through. And if you come along and go, I'd like to take up 25 minutes of your time to talk about the information security threat profile of this organisation, they'll just think it's a great opportunity for them to kill some emails. But when you start talking to the Risk and Audit Committee, they're a lot focused. They'll spend 3 hours just on the risk. So you can spend that time with them. And again, you need to, because they're your potential new best friend, you can start going to them and saying, when you meet next month, I want the whole meeting, and this is the agenda, and this is what we're going to talk about. And you start ingratiating yourself in there, and they'll report it back up to the board. That way, you've only got to go to the board once a year and say, everything's great. And they'll go, love your work. But going back to the gold, bronze, and silver, or maybe even the platinum, for the frequent flyers out there amongst you, once you take them through that journey and explain to them, this is what it means. And by you signing off on us being the bronze or the silver or the gold, this is what it means out the back end. So again, I'm far, far from critical of organisations that just go, you know what, for these reasons, I'm happy to be only silver. Of course, out the back end of that, if there is a problem, and they start saying, so tell me, Mr. InfoSec or Mrs. InfoSec professional, why didn't you pick up on this for whatever reason, whether it was a phishing attack, an insider attack, whatever it might be. That's when you need to be defensible with your paperwork and say, remember you signed us being the bronze standard? And I said being bronze means these things. This is what it means. And if they don't like that, then you're probably starting to look for a new job. That's the reality. So, again, focusing on governance. There's again, risk and audit committees, again, they're professionals. The majority of them, they understand it. So I'm framework agnostic. I've got a couple up there. I'm sure you're all aware of them. You've all seen them. Your organisation might already be part of one of those, 27,000 and whatever. You know, usually the default. But again, taking your risk and audit committee down that process of, we're going to choose this standard. We're going to go NIST. And these are the reasons. I'm going to keep reiterating, they can be your best friend, the risk and audit committee, but you've got to take them through the journey. You've got to say to them, this is why it's important, this is why we have a governance framework. They'll be asking for a governance framework. In fact, they should be asking for a governance framework. And there's plenty of stuff out there written about different governance frameworks and how you can do it and why you can do it and if you can do it. So as we're going through this journey and we're speaking to them, we're saying, this is what we're going to do and this is our work for the next X amount of years, and it's all part of the overarching strategy and everything's great, and as I mentioned before, I really don't like using the word protection. We're starting to sort of have that conversation and we're starting to get them drilled into it. We're not being technical with what we're saying. We're not talking about the widgets. We're not going to say, and we're going to go to this vendor and we're going to buy this amount of endpoint protection and we're going to do any of that. That's a management issue. The board don't need to know it. Quite frankly, really don't want to know it. So when we're going through that, we're starting to write everything down. We're doing our checklists, got our spreadsheets. It's all pretty good. And we've worked out what's standard. They've signed off on it and you're reporting to them. I'd argue quarterly would be good best practice, that you should be getting in front of the Risk and Audit Committee at least every quarter. Often it depends on how often they meet, depends on their workload, depends on the industry you're in, a whole bunch of other what ifs. So, got the slides all a bit mucked around, but this is I'm going to talk about the personal responsibility. I was going to touch on this earlier. We've had some great presentations this morning, and when I don't know if anyone listened to the Clyde & Co lawyers on the data breach legislation. I particularly like that, but stuff like that I enjoy anyway. One thing that piques directors' interest is personal responsibility. If you talk work health and safety to them, it piques their interest because there's personal responsibility for company directors with work health and safety. When you look at data breaches and privacy breaches, as was listed on the slides this morning, $1.7 million fines for organisations, up to $340,000 fines for individuals. That piques directors' interest. When you start talking hip pocket issues, they start going, okay, I need to care about this. So an analogy I often use is actually equating it to work health and safety. Because it's been around for a good 10 plus years, and our data breach legislation comes in at February next year, even though we've had the privacy principle since 2016, something like that, 14, I can't remember. Having that analogy to their own personal responsibility and what it means to the organisation, again, it's not a bad way to pique their interest and start going, you're used to dealing with this framework, here's another framework, and this is what it means to the organisation from a reputational perspective and also from a monetary perspective. And of course, their role really, and again, particularly for listed companies, their role is to maximise shareholder value. And we've all seen the various stuff that comes out of organisations. We've all seen the corporate social responsibility pledges that they have. They're going to save the planet, the environment, and they're going to look after the homeless, going to do all this great stuff. And that's great. But their number one role is to maximise shareholder value. That's what every company director is focused on, particularly in listed companies. Of course, if you're in the not-for-profit sphere, maximising stakeholder value is a bit of a different proposition than what's listed on the share price. But it is their focus. And so again, because it's their focus, you've got to change your thinking to pique their interest, because you want these people to agree to what your program is. You want them to say to manager, they want to the CEO, CIO, whatever it might be, yes, I think this is very good, you should fund this program of work. It's your ultimate outcome. But again, it's why you're your best friend. So, as we're going through our conversation, what's the sorts of things that you might get asked? Again, you might want to have a bank of questions that you might want to ask the Risk and Audit Committee. You might want to have a little bit of a challenge to them. You might think to yourself, how much do you get the online environment? What's your use of the online environment? Is it just you use Microsoft products and a little bit of social media, or you're right into it? And again, from experience, there's always that one person that's got a little bit of knowledge, and we all know a little bit of knowledge is dangerous, that'll always throw that question to you. I just want to think, I want to impress myself in front of the other board members. They're actually not really there trying to catch you out. They just want a bit of bragging rights that, drop the word IP address or something like that. It makes them sound a little bit techy, you know. They just want the others to go, oh, gee, he's all over it. So you need to be prepared for all eventualities. Again, we're keeping it high, we're keeping it governance, we're looking at the strategy, and you've got to be ready for those Dorothy Dixes where they come along and go, wow, whatever it might be. So what's the sort of things that you might get? Top of mind, remembering their role, legal and regulatory requirements. There's a lot of regulatory requirements. I mentioned Work Health and Safety, I mentioned the Corporations Act 2001. We've now got the Privacy Act, And as of February next year, who knows what will happen with data breach notification. I don't know who's I certainly don't have an accurate crystal ball on who's going to report. I still think there'll be a ton of organisations that'll run the gauntlet and won't report. And if I was a listed company, I'd be tempted to take that punt. I don't run a listed company, by the way, so I can easily say that. But it's you know, who knows what will happen. But there's a lot more regulatory requirements. Again, that is front of mind of company directors. So what are you doing about it, Mr. or Ms. InfoSec professional? What's your approach? Again, you've already got them to agree that we're going to be let's call it the silver standard of InfoSec. So, you know, part of my body of work is, this is my approach to regulation. And they go, great, tick, we'll sign off on that, love your work. Have a bonus at the end of the year. Again, if we're starting to look at what the strategy of the organisation is, what's our approach? What's our current environment? Again, some of them want to get technical, even though it's not their role. Some of them might want to get a little bit tactical. Again, not their role. You might, remember, boardrooms are pretty dynamic. You might have managing directors. So they've got a dual hat. They're part of the company directors, but they've got the word management in there. So they might start asking some questions. What's our current threat environment? The sector that we operate in, what are you seeing? What's happening to our competitors? Yeah, the main sector that gets that largely right is the banking and finance. They're the ones that put the most effort into collaboration, the rest various piecemeal. So you need to be ready for these sorts of things. You know, you might want to have a few stats up your sleeve. Don't use the 35% of statistics are made up on the spot line. That won't go down well. But you might want to sort of say, this is what we're seeing. People love stats. You know, you might want to talk about anything. Go to a vendor and get some stats. There's plenty of vendor-based stats. Of course, a lot of the discussions, or a lot of the presentations this morning, particularly the plenary ones, we've been talking about people and process. Couldn't agree with those folk that were speaking more. 100%. Technology's great. People and process is really, I think, where it's all at. So you might want to have an answer on that. What does it mean? We have this big, diverse organisation, or we have a tiny organisation. We have stakeholders that we interact with from various means. What are we doing to protect them? What are we doing about being a good corporate citizen online? What's the nice things we're saying on social media? What are the nice things people are saying about us? All that sort of stuff. They'll lap it up. They'll think it's great. Always good to be well armed. For anyone here's had an ex-government career, you always then take, you know, reams of paper with you for those 5 questions you may or may not get asked, I should say. Of course, accountability is always a great one. Who's the buck stop with? What does it mean? You as the InfoSec professional, what is it that you're going to be responsible, that you're going to put potentially your career on the line? You know, WannaCry is a great example. Of course, you know, the interest level, it's like a hockey stick. For company directors, are all going, oh, what are we going to do? So if you got the call over the weekend, what would have been your response? Came out in the media on Friday because it was very European based for their Friday, into our Saturday morning. Maybe some of you worked all that weekend. But if you got the call that came down from the Risk and Audit Committee, what's the 3 things you would have told them that you're doing? Or the 3 things that you are quite convinced of that was going to protect your organisation? Or the 3 things that you should have done or could have done to protect your organisation, but because you're only the bronze standard, you didn't do it. Maybe you didn't have that test facility to test the patches before they went live, and so you didn't put the patch live, or you didn't, winged it, whatever. Again, hit it between the eyes with them. Resources. I started off talking about resources. We all love more resources, we all love more people, we all love more money. It's not going to happen. How do you convince them that you need to put a sum of money around it? And again, organisations sort of get how it works generally, but all of a sudden you put the word technology in there and everything goes a little bit hazy. A lot of organisations will understand that for every, say, $100 of income we get, we know that we spend $1.50 of that on the office fit out, $1.50 on corporate travel, $1.50 on insurance policies. They can segment out a lot of what that $100 income means. So you need to say to them, out of that $100 income to the organisation, I need $1 of that for information security. And these are the reasons why, because we're in this sector. It's really important. Our organisation can't focus without it, can't operate without it. We want to move into these adjacent markets. We want these verticals, whatever it is. That's your sales pitch. And until they work that out, that we're going to be this level and we're going to require this amount of spending, that's when the penny will drop and they go, okay. Perfect sense to me. Well, hopefully. I'm talking best scenario here. Of course, every now and then it turns to custard. Not always, every now and then. And of course, continual improvement. Think work health and safety. Again, from experience, I can tell you, work health and safety analogies are a great analogy. We've been doing it for a long time. You don't go anywhere without seeing people with high visibility clothes. I was only watching on the TV last night, the night before, about Amazon coming to Australia in their fulfillment centres. Everything's painted fluoro yellow. You know, work health and safety is front of mind for most organisations. Whether it's the way we sit at our chair or stand at our desk, use that analogy. We're doing these things. It's a continuous improvement. We're always looking to upskill people. We're always looking to educate people. We do presentations, we do this, we do that. We're trying to bring it all up there. So some things to think about. And of course, they're just some half a dozen questions. You'll always get the left field ones, which you've got to be quick on your feet. But basically, I think it's a good news story. I think getting company directors involved is a good news story. They need to be involved. Too many people approach it the wrong way. Too many consultancies approach it the wrong way. Remembering your board aren't responsible for P&L. They don't have purchase orders in their back pockets. Again, you'll see a lot of particularly top tier organisations out there that will be knocking on your door saying, oh, can we come along, we'll give a free presentation. And they'll be thinking, this is a great way to get the sales pitch to the top of mind people. Wrong audience, wrong message, wrong everything. Just puts people off. But they are a key constituency. They need to be your allies in everything you do. And part of that, the most difficult sell of them all, is ROI. Because you're going to have a bunch of company directors that are sitting there, they're going to say, okay, we get it. Well, we get some of it. We understand where we work, we understand where we're headed, we've agreed to this program of work, we understand you're going to do these things, we're going to mitigate risk doing this, and their wheels are turning, it's all pretty good. And then they're going to sit there and they're going to think to themselves, so I'm going to invest a sum of money to guard against something that may or may not happen, and if something doesn't happen, as in a hack or whatever it might be, something doesn't happen, is that because of the great investment I just made in you and these vendors and these consultants? And you're going to sit there and go, is that the time? Another coffee perhaps? It's a really difficult question to ask. And I'd be surprised if you haven't had it already, and you'll definitely get that. Because these are focused individuals that are on the bang for buck. So I would highly recommend you have a pretty well polished answer to how you're measuring your return on investment. And we all know it's really hard, because it is true. You can have a great security program and you might never need it. You might have a great incident response plans. He's hoping you all do. And you might never need it, and he's hoping you never do. But selling that ROI, selling it that, well, if we don't do any of this, and here's some case studies of some organisations that didn't have any of that, and it all went south, is probably not a bad thing to have. Maybe you should trot some of those case studies out early on in your discussion about why we need a program of work, why they as board need to be informed, why they need to sign off on the risk and audit charter when it comes to information security. But ROI is a tough question. We all know it's a tough question. You'll get it. They're going to want to know an answer. Insurance is the other great one. We wrote a cyber insurance research paper I think 4 years ago, when it was very nascent. I predicted it was going to be nascent for some time. I was largely wrong. It's not nascent anymore. Never ever use my ball, by the way. But now I'm seeing a lot of organisations, because I can't think of anything what to do, to buy cyber insurance. I'm not necessarily pro or anti cyber insurance. I'm more anti the brokers that write it, But that's probably a discussion for another day, maybe because they don't really want to go through the work to actually work out the risk environment. Again, a story for another day. But you're going to get that question, I guarantee it. Should we get cyber insurance? Again, organisations know what insurance is. Company directors, risk and audit committees, they understand insurance. They insure their buildings, they insure their people, they insure their cars. They understand what an insurance policy means to them, but they don't get what cyber insurance is. I don't think half the market that writes cyber insurance policy does either, but it's a question you're likely to get, and they're going to say, so, what do you reckon? You might say, can we hire some actual people and blah, 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 but it's a tough one. It's a tough one, but I'm seeing a lot of organisations go down that path, and I'm also seeing a lot of organisations where the discussion bounces around internally with cyber insurance, where they're going, we're going to get cyber insurance, and if we do these things, we're going to get a cheaper policy. And you say, great, what are those things? And they say, well, we need to encrypt the network. Great, makes our premium cheaper. And you go, perfect, we can do that. And you get them a couple of quotes, and they go, a little bit more expensive than we were thinking. Yeah. And really hard too, because remember our old CIA triangle, everyone wants availability. That's another thing I haven't talked about with company directors. They just want availability if they're on the network. So insurance is an interesting one, still got a long way to go. And then lastly, how do you keep them informed? This is really how do you keep the risk and audit informed? I mentioned I think you should be in front of them at least every quarter. If they meet monthly, then I think you need to take up a whole one of those 3-hour meetings per month. You really need to be front and centre, explaining everything. Can't say it often enough, they're your next best friend. That's the best way to inform them. You get informed, everyone's kind of happy. And at the end of the day, this is what you want them to focus on. What it means if we do nothing. Because doing nothing is not an option. We all know that. Company directors might not know that. So, again, a litany of examples of organisations that have done nothing. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending which way you look at it, some listed companies that have done nothing actually haven't suffered that badly. When you look at, local examples, local Queensland examples, when you look at the Maules Creek mine, and they had their ANZ, let's call it phishing attack some years ago. Share price dropped, share price came back up. So, not everyone suffers, but we got reputational damage, a few other things. Alrighty. Happy to take questions. I think we've got a couple of minutes left.
Yep, we have 7 minutes left for questions. So if anyone wants the mic so they can be heard a little louder, or I can repeat the questions for you.
Nigel, where do you think is the best definition of the separation between governance and management?
So the Institute of Company Directors, if anyone's a member, have got a ton of stuff on that. You need member access to log into their site to get down to that granularity, but they've got a lot of resources. But again, the Corporations Act explicitly says what a company director's role is. It doesn't really explicitly say what a management role is, just says a company's director is not management.
Just on that, COVID also from an IT perspective has got some guidance between the difference of governance and management. I went to the Clive & Co. workshop yesterday, which they covered cyber insurance.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It seemed to me that there's a lot of similarities between the ROI for InfoSec and the insurance argument. You're paying for something that may not, to protect against something that may not happen. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Again, I'm a bit strange on the whole insurance thing, because I've spoken to brokers and I still don't think they're prepared to put the work into sitting down with an organisation to discovering a fit for purpose policy for that organisation. Again, I'm not anti cyber insurance. I'm not 100% pro. I'm it's a horses for courses. I get insurance, and if an organisation decides that's how they want to potentially mitigate a problem, that's great. But I think it's too relied on it. For example, one of my many hats is I'm the cyber security ambassador for COSBOA. People know what COSBOA is, the Council of Small Business of Australia. They've just signed an agreement with, I can't remember the underwriter, not a top tier one, to get cyber insurance for all their 265,000 members, and they're pushing that aggressively. And I get a bit funny with that because it's all of a sudden like, well, you know, we're talking really some small organisations that really could just use home use sort of grade antivirus, anti-whatever. They've got nothing. They're going, oh, well, we won't bother with any of that. We're just going to get this insurance policy and everything will be all right. And everything won't be all right because they're not looking at what it means. You know, it's a horses for courses. You know, and then I wasn't at the workshop at the talk this morning where they're talking about, I think they said $1 million is what it sort of generally costs. I liked how the legal expenses were the most. So it wasn't lost on me. Wasn't lost on them either. So I kind of don't have an answer. It's one of those, it depends. It's rubbery.
Anyone else? Still have a few minutes left.
They might want to go to somewhere where the air conditioning's on.
It's crowded in here.
It is.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions.
Well, thanks for coming up. Appreciate everyone's time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have a little